Adam Cross was no stranger to hardship. He'd seen enough death and destruction in his youth to last a lifetime. That's why, when he retired from his military service, he sought peace in the quietest corner of the galaxy. The mining colony on Drexfor was as far removed from the galactic wars as one could get. Its days were spent in the rhythmic hum of machinery, the scrape of pickaxes against the crust of the barren moon, and the occasional buzz of conversation in the local cantina. It was a dull existence, but it was safe, or so Adam had hoped. The evening had begun like any other. The twin suns of Drexfor dipped low, casting a dim orange light across the barren landscape. Adam wiped his grease-streaked hands on his jumpsuit, fixing the dent in an old mining transport vehicle. The sound of tools clanging on metal echoed in the empty hangar. As the last rays of the suns faded, a sense of stillness descended on the colony, a tranquility that had become a rare luxury in a galaxy torn by war. But that peace was shattered in an instant. A deafening roar ripped through the sky, shaking the ground beneath Adam's feet. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest, as the colony's alarm system blared to life. The deafening sirens screamed in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of booming, thunderous impacts. Adam's mind raced. Attack? Before he could react, the first explosion hit, sending a shockwave through the colony. The walls of the hangar buckled. The ground trembled beneath him. He barely had time to brace himself before another blast rattled the air. Adam's instincts kicked in, his soldier's training surfacing despite years of trying to bury it. "Get to the shelter," a voice screamed through the comms, cutting through the chaos. It was the voice of Commander Rhea, the colony's head of security. Her voice was tight, strained. Now. Adam didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled for cover, adrenaline surging through his veins as he sprinted toward the shelter. The world around him seemed to explode in slow motion. Buildings crumbled. The screech of metal tearing apart filled the air. In the distance, Adam saw the unmistakable shape of alien ships, sleek, metallic, and menacing. They hovered above the colony, spitting fire down upon the helpless civilians below. Vraxians. Adam had heard rumors, whispers of these creatures, an ancient race of brutal conquerors, rumored to have laid waste to entire star systems in their quest for galactic domination, and now they had come for Drexfor. He didn't have time to think. A blinding flash of light cut through the air, followed by an intense heat. The shelter door was just ahead, but as Adam dove for cover, a chunk of debris collided with his side, knocking the wind from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, pain searing through his ribs. Gritting his teeth, he rolled over and pushed himself up, only to see the shelter door slam shut, a few stragglers still running toward it. And then the unthinkable happened. The Vraxian ships above began to fire in unison, and the entire colony lit up like a bonfire. Explosions ripped through the buildings, sending plumes of smoke and flame into the air. It was over. The Vraxians had not only attacked, they were annihilating them, leaving nothing but rubble in their wake. Adam's blood ran cold as he watched his home burn. He was alone. He didn't know if anyone had made it to the shelter. What now? The galaxy was suddenly a very different place. He staggered to his feet, a strange resolve hardening within him. He had to survive. He had to survive. For the first time since his discharge, the soldier within Adam reawakened, rising to meet the challenge ahead. As the firestorms blazed behind him, Adam Cross disappeared into the night. The battle for Drexfor was just beginning. Adam stumbled through the crumbling remains of Drexfor, his breath ragged in the acrid smoke. His thoughts raced as he moved with grim determination, each step taking him farther from the wreckage of the colony and closer to something he hadn't anticipated: survival. The pain in his side was a constant reminder of his vulnerability. He could feel the blood soaking into his jumpsuit, the sharp pangs of bruised ribs with each movement. But it wasn't the physical pain that clouded his mind, it was the overwhelming sense of loss. His home, his friends, The life he had worked so hard to build, now gone in a matter of minutes. As he reached the edge of the ruined town, Adam heard something, a faint sound that cut through the steady hum of distant explosions. The crackle of static on a comlink, a voice, a woman's voice. To anyone receiving this, we're holding out in the ruins of Sector 7. If you can hear us, we need help. Adam's heart skipped. The voice sounded familiar, urgent, but not panicked. He'd heard it before, over the comms in the colony's security operations. It was Commander Rhea. Without hesitation, Adam made his way toward the signal, ducking into alleyways and navigating the wreckage. The cold moonlight illuminated the twisted metal and broken concrete, and the silence that followed each explosion was deafening. He didn't know how many survivors there were, but he knew the odds of any of them still being alive were slim. As he moved deeper into the ruins, the sound of distant blaster fire reached his ears, followed by a series of loud impacts. He pushed himself harder, his body protesting, but he couldn't afford to stop now. He wasn't sure if anyone would still be there by the time he arrived. When he finally reached the source of the transmission, he found an unexpected sight. A small group of survivors, about a dozen in total, were huddled behind a barricade made from broken parts of buildings. They were armed with scavenged weapons, their eyes wide with fear but burning with determination. At the center of it all was a tall, angular woman with sharp features and striking violet eyes, dressed in a faded combat suit and holding a plasma rifle. It was Velia. Her eyes met Adam's as he approached, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with the weight of their shared knowledge. The Vraxians had come for them all, and the galaxy was about to be thrown into chaos. "You're human," Velia said, her voice calm, but tinged with something that could only be described as recognition. "I thought I felt something strange in the air." Adam didn't respond right away. His training had kicked in, and he assessed the situation, the barricade, the enemy's position, their dwindling ammo. Velia was no ordinary survivor. There was something about her that suggested she was more than a mere soldier. She had the quiet confidence of someone who had seen countless battles and won. "Are you the one leading the resistance?" Adam asked, his voice hoarse. Velia gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "In a way, but right now I'm just trying to keep these people alive. We need to move, or we'll be sitting ducks when the Vraxians come for us." Adam glanced over his shoulder. The Vraxian ships hovered ominously in the distance, their guns silently tracking the ground below. He had no idea how much time they had left, but every second felt like a ticking clock. "I don't know what I can do," he admitted, the weight of his words almost suffocating him. "I'm not part of any resistance. I'm just a guy who happened to survive." Velia studied him for a moment, her eyes calculating. "You were a soldier," she said, a statement, not a question. "You know how to fight. You know how to lead." Adam shook his head, the thought of commanding again making his stomach turn. "I'm not that man anymore. I'm just a mechanic now." "Then you're the exact person we need." Velia's voice was firm, her tone cutting through the doubt in Adam's mind. "The Vraxians are systematic in their destruction, but they don't understand the human way of thinking. You think outside the box. You don't follow orders blindly. That's what makes you dangerous to them. We need you, Adam." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't sure why she believed in him, but in that moment, something inside him stirred, a spark of the soldier he used to be. Maybe he couldn't undo the damage, but he could fight for the future. He could fight for these people. "I don't know if I can lead them," Adam muttered, looking at the ragtag survivors huddled around the barricade. "I don't have the experience." "You don't need experience," Velia said, her voice low and intense. "You need resolve, and that I can see you have." Adam didn't have an answer. The doubts still clung to him, gnawing at the edges of his mind, but the Vraxians were coming. He didn't have time to second-guess himself. "All right," he said finally, his voice rough but steady. "What's the plan?" Velia gave him a brief, sharp smile. "We fight. we survive, and we take the first step toward kicking the Vraxians off our world. And with that, Adam Cross, reluctant hero or not, stepped into the fray. The night was still, broken only by the occasional tremor of distant explosions as the Vraxian fleet loomed above the planet. Adam stood among the survivors, the weight of their collective hopes resting on his shoulders. His head was spinning, but he pushed the doubt aside. He couldn't afford to let them see his uncertainty. Velia had placed her trust in him, and though he still wasn't sure why, he wasn't about to let her down. "Here's the plan," Velia began, her voice calm and precise as she gathered the group around. "The Vraxians are consolidating their forces near the western mining facility. They're establishing a forward base for their occupation. If we hit them hard enough, we can cripple their operation for good. But we move fast, and we hit them where it hurts. No hesitation." Adam surveyed the faces around him. Most were civilians, miners, technicians, and laborers, ill-prepared for combat. But each of them wore the same look in their eyes, defiance. They weren't going to let their home fall without a fight. Velia handed Adam a small datapad, showing him a map of the Vraxian stronghold. "The weak point is their supply line," she continued. "If we can destroy it, their logistics will collapse, and we can cut off reinforcements. That's where you come in. We'll need your tactical knowledge to guide us through." Adam didn't respond immediately. The thought of commanding again felt foreign, but the faces around him, their trust, stirred something inside him. He glanced at the map, his mind instantly calculating escape routes, weak points, and potential ambush sites. His military training was a buried part of him, but it was still there, lurking just below the surface. "We strike fast, then," Adam said, his voice low. "A hit and run. We don't engage them directly unless we have to. We get in, we destroy their supply depot, and we get out. Everyone sticks to the plan, and no one breaks formation." Velia nodded. "Exactly. We'll move in 2 groups. You'll lead one, I'll lead the other. We hit the depot at the same time, then fall back to the outskirts. We'll rendezvous at the old industrial zone." Adam felt the knot in his stomach tighten, but he didn't show it. He knew better than anyone that war didn't care about plans. It cared about survival, and survival meant using every advantage, no matter how small. The team set off under the cover of darkness, moving quickly and quietly through the ruins of Drex 4. The faint hum of Vraxian ships above sent a chill down Adam's spine, but he focused on the mission. His team was counting on him. The adrenaline kicked in, sharpening his senses. As they neared the target, the unmistakable sound of Vraxian patrols echoed through the streets. Adam signaled for the group to stop, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're close," Adam whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Get ready." A quiet tension hung in the air, the minutes stretching longer than they should have. Adam's pulse quickened as they moved into position. The Vraxian stronghold was just ahead, a towering structure of alien metal and technology. The depot was located at its core, surrounded by a web of turrets and guards. Adam had to think fast. Any misstep here would be their last. "On my mark," Adam whispered, his voice barely audible. "We move in 3, 2, 1. He was the first to break cover, charging toward the nearest turret and taking it out with a well-placed shot. The team followed, moving in synchronized bursts, hitting their targets with precision. The Vraxian guards were caught off guard, and within moments, chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the air as Adam's team set charges around the depot. The Vraxians fought back, but they were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the attack. For a few precious minutes, it was a victory. The depot went up in flames, its supply caches incinerating in a brilliant burst of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Vraxian forces, and Adam could hear their frenzied communications as they scrambled to regroup. But then came the cost. Adam turned to check on his team. Valia's group was already pulling back, but Adam's group had been caught in the open. The Vraxians were rallying quickly, and their counterattack was brutal. One of Adam's fighters, a young miner named Jorik, took a direct hit to his chest, his body crumpling to the ground in a heap. The sight of it froze Adam's blood. "Jorik!" A voice screamed from behind him. One of the other survivors, a woman named Tessa, rushed to his side, but it was already too late. Jorik's lifeless body lay motionless, the blood pooling around him. The loss hit like a punch to the gut. Adam had seen death before, but this was different. These weren't soldiers in a distant war. These were people he had spoken to, laughed with. They had trusted him. But there was no time for grief. The Vraxians were regrouping. Adam turned sharply, his hand gripping the comms unit. "Pull back, now." The retreat was frantic. The group fought their way back to the rendezvous point, every step heavy with the cost of what they'd just done. Adam's heart pounded in his chest, the guilt gnawing at him. He had led them into this fight, and they had paid for it. When they finally reached the industrial zone, Adam was breathless, his mind reeling. The victory had come with a high price. Jorik's death was a stark reminder that war didn't care about good intentions or strategy. It only cared about survival. Valia met him at the rendezvous, her face unreadable. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. They had won, but at what cost? Adam's resolve had been tested, and it had hardened. The fight was just beginning, and the galaxy's fate was now tied to every decision he made. But as he looked around at the survivors, each of them scared, each of them fighting for their lives, he knew that the real battle had only just begun. The dust had barely settled when Adam knelt beside Jorik's body. The explosion that had taken him had been brutal, tearing through the young miner's chest and leaving a mangled mess of what had once been a person. Tessa still stood over him, frozen in grief, her face pale, her hands shaking. Adam didn't know what to say. Words felt hollow in the wake of death, especially this kind. This wasn't some far-off enemy he could justify, or a casualty in a war that felt distant and detached. This was personal. Jorik had been a friend, a comrade. Valia's voice broke through the weight of silence. "We need to move. They'll send reinforcements." Adam's head snapped up. She was right, of course. They couldn't stay here, not with the Vraxians surely coordinating their next assault, but every instinct in Adam screamed to mourn, to honor the dead. He stood up, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Get him into cover," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "We'll have time to grieve later." The others reluctantly obeyed, dragging Jorik's body into a nearby building for shelter. Adam turned away, his jaw tight. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't just a soldier again. He was the leader of this ragtag group, and every decision he made meant life or death. "How much longer before they come after us?" Adam asked Valia, already shifting into tactical mode. "Hard to say. The Vraxians don't give up easily. They'll probably take their time regrouping, but once they realize what we did, they'll move fast. We have no idea how many reinforcements they have in orbit." Adam nodded grimly. "Then we need to hit them before they can fully mobilize. We know they're overextended. We've got to push them back, keep them on the defensive." Valia's violet eyes met his, appraising. "You're thinking of attacking them now?" "We strike now, before they can react. We hit their supply chain again, this time deeper, harder, and we get out before they know what hit them." She considered his plan, her lips pressed together as if weighing his words against something deeper. Finally, she spoke. "It's a risk, but it might work. We've only got one shot at this. If we don't hit them hard enough, they'll come down on us with everything they've got." Adam looked at the group behind him. The survivors, Jorik's friends, his neighbors, were huddled together, weapons in hand, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. But even now, after everything they had been through, there was resolve in their eyes. They were ready to fight again. "Let's make it count," Adam said, feeling the weight of his words more than ever. The next few hours were a blur of planning and preparations. Adam, Valia, and a small group of the most capable survivors scouted out the next Vraxian target, a heavily fortified fuel depot that, if destroyed, would cripple the alien force's ability to maintain their hold on Drexfor. They moved through the ruins of the colony, using the same stealth that had allowed them to destroy the first depot. This time, the stakes were higher, and Adam could feel the tension building with each step. They reached their target under the cover of darkness, a towering structure that seemed to hum with power. Guard towers, alien turrets, and patrols dotted the area, but Adam had already mapped out the best approach. His soldiers, if he could still call them that, set up position, the quiet click of their weapons preparing for the fight ahead. Valia gave him a nod, signaling the beginning of their assault. Adam exhaled slowly, a final moment of calm before the storm. "On my mark," he whispered. "We take the turrets first, then plant the charges." Valia took a deep breath. "I'll cover the perimeter. You do what you do best." Adam didn't need more encouragement. With a grunt, he broke cover, sprinting toward the nearest turret, his rifle steady in his grip. The first shot hit its mark, an explosion of sparks and alien metal, but Adam didn't stop to watch. He was already moving, targeting the next turret, the next position, each step carefully calculated to minimize their exposure. Gunfire rang out as the Vraxians realized they were under attack, but Adam and his team moved with deadly precision. They knew their target. They knew their escape routes. And most importantly, they knew they were running out of time. The explosion rocked the night. The fuel depot detonated in a cataclysmic burst, sending a shockwave through the ground that rattled the air. Adam felt the heat on his face, his heart pounding in his chest. But they didn't have time to celebrate. The Vraxians would be coming soon, and they had to move before their position was compromised. "We're done here," Adam shouted, his voice hoarse from adrenaline. "Fall back." The survivors scrambled to retreat, running through the chaos of the burning depot. Adam felt the rush of victory mixed with the bitter taste of what they had sacrificed: lives, resources, friends. Each step felt heavier than the last, but there was no turning back. As they reached the outskirts of the zone, Adam looked over his shoulder at the towering inferno in the distance. It had worked. They had crippled the Vraxians' ability to resupply. But the battle was far from over. They reached their safe house in the ruined industrial district, breathless and bruised. Adam's legs felt like lead, but he pushed the exhaustion down. Valia was right behind him, her expression hard. Their group had lost another soldier, this time to a sniper, but they had achieved something. Adam looked out at the smoldering remnants of the fuel depot, his heart heavy. This was war, and in war, victories came at a cost. But he was starting to realize that the real cost was yet to come. The safe house was a grim place, an abandoned factory with walls thick with the remnants of old machinery and rusting equipment. It was the kind of place where hope didn't easily take root, but they had to make do. As Adam stepped inside, the scent of damp metal and oil filled his nostrils, grounding him in the reality of their situation. The victory they'd achieved by destroying the Vraxian fuel depot felt hollow, overshadowed by the growing sense of impending doom. The Vraxians would retaliate, and this time, they would come harder. Adam set down his rifle, his hand lingering on the worn grip. His fingers were slick with sweat, despite the cold air of the factory. The team had made it out, but they hadn't escaped unscathed. Tessa was still reeling from the loss of Jorek, her face a mask of exhaustion and grief. The others were silent, tending to their wounds, reloading their weapons, and preparing for what was to come. Valia stepped up to Adam, her violet eyes sharp, but her usual confidence was tempered by something darker. She'd seen death, but even she had her limits. The weight of leadership was heavy on both of them. "That's 2 major hits," she said, her voice low, as if speaking aloud helped her process the enormity of their actions. "We've slowed them down, but we've also made ourselves a target. The Vraxians don't take losing lightly. I know, Adam muttered, glancing around at the survivors. We've pissed them off, and I'm not sure we've got enough firepower to keep this going much longer. Valia tilted her head slightly. We do what we have to. You said it yourself. This isn't about firepower. It's about survival. We can't beat them head on, but we can hit them where they least expect it. We've been doing this long enough to know that guerrilla warfare isn't about strength. It's about strategy. Adam nodded, but the unease in his gut wouldn't subside. He knew she was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time, and they were losing. We've got to find a way to make them pay for what they've done, Adam said, clenching his fists. Every strike we make is costing lives, and I'm not sure how much longer we can keep up with this. Valia studied him for a moment before responding. You're not in this alone, Adam. You lead, but we follow. We all have something to fight for. We all have a stake in this. You're not just a leader because of what you've done. You're a leader because of what you can inspire. Adam's eyes flicked over to the survivors again. Tessa, who had been avoiding eye contact, now met his gaze, her expression determined, if not weary. The others were listening, waiting for him to say something to give them direction. He was the man they had put their faith in, whether he wanted it or not. I'll keep them alive, Adam said, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. But I can't do it alone. I need every one of you to step up. No more hesitation. No more playing safe. We take the fight to them, hard and fast. Valia nodded, her gaze resolute. Then we make our next move count. We can't afford another failure. As the group gathered around, preparing for the next phase of their fight, Adam's mind raced. They were planning their next move, but something gnawed at him, the knowledge that each victory came with a price. The resistance was small. Their numbers were dwindling, and even as he mapped out their next attack, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Hours later, Adam stood at the factory's broken window, staring out at the war-torn landscape. The once thriving colony of Drex 4 had been reduced to a shell of itself. Buildings that had once housed families and workers were now nothing more than ruins, the streets littered with the debris of fallen soldiers, both Vraxian and human. The sky above was a sickly shade of red, tinted by the firestorms that raged across the horizon. Drex 4 was burning, and Adam knew that, as much as they fought, the Vraxians would stop at nothing to see it completely destroyed. Behind him, Valia approached, her steps quiet but purposeful. We're ready, she said. The plan's in motion. We hit them at their forward base. It's risky, but it's our best shot at crippling their command structure. If we can take out their leadership, we might be able to turn the tide. Adam turned to her, his expression hard. I don't want anyone else to die, but I know we don't have a choice. We fight because we have no choice, Valia replied softly, and because we're not done yet. Adam met her gaze, the determination in her eyes reflecting the same fire that burned in his own. They weren't done yet, not by a long shot. With one last look at the ruins of their world, Adam squared his shoulders and turned toward the door. The war wasn't over, but if he had any say in it, they would make sure the Vraxians knew that humanity, however small, however battered, wasn't going down without a fight. The galaxy's fate wasn't sealed yet, and Adam Cross would make sure of it. The night was alive with the hum of tension as Adam's team prepared for their most daring mission yet. Drex 4's skies were a patchwork of smoke and flame, the remnants of battles fought and lost, but now, under the shadow of the Vraxian stronghold, Adam could feel something shifting. They were no longer just skirmishing, they were aiming at the heart of the Vraxian operation on the planet. And if they succeeded, it could change the course of the war. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Vraxian command center, located deep within the sprawling fortress in the northern sector, and eliminate their high-ranking officers. This was the key to turning the tide. Without leadership, the Vraxian forces would falter, their coordination falling apart. But there was one thing Adam knew for certain. This wasn't going to be easy. They gathered around the table in the darkened corner of the safe house, a flickering holographic map of the Vraxian stronghold casting eerie light on their faces. Valia was at the center, her eyes cold and calculating as she outlined the final details of the mission. Once we breach the outer wall, we'll have a limited window to get inside before the Vraxians can lock down the area, Valia explained, pointing to the fortified structure on the map. Our team will split into 2 groups. Adam, you'll lead one, I'll take the other. We'll infiltrate the command center simultaneously, with the goal of neutralizing their top officers. We move fast, no time for hesitation. Adam studied the map, his mind ticking through the possibilities. The Vraxians were formidable, and their defenses would be tight. He knew what lay ahead: close-quarter combat, constant threat of reinforcements, and the harsh reality of what it meant to fight for survival. Tessa, standing beside him, spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension. What if we can't get to them in time? What if we're overwhelmed? Adam met her gaze. We don't have a choice. We hit them hard, take out their leadership, and get out. There's no room for mistakes. The rest of the team nodded in agreement. They were in this together, each one ready to sacrifice everything to give humanity a fighting chance. Adam wasn't sure how many of them would make it back, but he could see it in their eyes. They were all ready to fight to the end. The night seemed to stretch on forever as they moved toward the fortress, the landscape around them barely illuminated by the orange glow of distant fires. The Vraxians had fortified the area heavily, their sentries patrolling the perimeter in an unbroken rhythm. Adam's group moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows, relying on stealth to avoid detection. His heart pounded as they neared the first checkpoint. The fortress loomed ahead, its jagged towers rising like dark spires against the night sky. The air felt thick with the weight of the mission. He could almost taste the danger in the atmosphere. His fingers tightened around his weapon as they reached the base of the outer wall. Valia was ahead of him, her voice barely a whisper. On my mark, we breached the wall. Stick together. In and out. Don't engage unless you have to. Adam gave a sharp nod, signaling the team to move. He felt the weight of the moment as they approached the breach point. A few more steps, and they'd be inside the heart of the Vraxian war machine. There would be no turning back. The explosion was deafening. The wall crumbled in on itself, the Vraxian forces nearby scrambling as the blast tore through their defenses. Adam didn't wait to hear the alarms. He was already moving, a surge of adrenaline fueling every step. The team flooded through the gap, guns raised and ready for whatever came next. They were met with immediate resistance. Vraxian soldiers emerged from the shadows, weapons raised, their alien features twisted in fury. But Adam's team was faster. They struck with precision, their weapons cutting down the enemy in a deadly rhythm, a blur of movement and fire. Adam's pulse thrummed in his ears as they pushed deeper into the stronghold, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. The deeper they went, the heavier the resistance became. The Vraxians were smart, coordinating their counterattacks with military precision. But Adam and his team were ready. They made their way through the maze of corridors, using every advantage they could, every corner, every shadow. The closer they got to the command center, the more the tension built. This was it, one final push. Adam's breath came in quick bursts as they reached the final door, a heavily fortified checkpoint. Beyond it lay the command center. He glanced at Valia, who nodded, signaling the team to prepare. Now, Adam said, his voice low but clear, we finish this. The door exploded inward with a blast of force, and Adam led the charge into the command center. The Vraxians inside barely had time to react. Adam's rifle roared, and the first officer fell, his body crumpling under the weight of the attack. Valia's team followed through, securing the room with deadly efficiency. But then, a voice echoed through the chaos. Cross. Adam froze. His blood ran cold as he recognized the voice, Zorthar. the Vraxian general. Zorthar stepped from the shadows, his massive, armored form imposing even in the midst of the carnage. His eyes locked onto Adam's, an expression of cold recognition flickering across his alien face. "You think you can win this war?" Zorthar sneered. "You are nothing." Adam's fingers tightened on his weapon. The battle wasn't over, and now it had become personal. Adam's mind raced as he watched the Vraxian fortress around him crumble. The explosion had only been the beginning. The entire structure was coming apart, a chain reaction of fires and collapsing walls that would soon seal the fate of everyone inside. Zorthar's body, still twitching and burning from the blast, was a mere shadow of the force it had once been. But even in his final moments, the Vraxian general exuded a dark, almost inhuman aura. Adam could feel the sweat trickling down his face, the sting of blood mixing with the soot and dirt that coated his skin. His team was still fighting, desperately holding off Vraxian reinforcements as the clock ticked down. Each second brought them closer to escape, or closer to being buried under the rubble of the Empire's last stronghold. "Fall back," Adam shouted to his team. "We've done enough damage. We need to get out before the whole place comes down." His voice was hoarse from the smoke, but his words were clear. There was no time to waste. They had succeeded in crippling the Vraxians' command center, but survival was their priority now. As he turned to move, Valia's voice rang out through the chaos. "We need to take the general down. If Zorthar survives this, it won't matter how much we've destroyed. He'll come for us with everything he's got." Adam turned back, eyes narrowing on Zorthar's still form. The Vraxian general had already begun to stir, the nanotech in his body working furiously to heal his wounds. It was then that Adam realized the fight was far from over. Zorthar would survive the blast, and his hatred for humanity would only fuel him further. There was only one way to finish it. Adam sprinted toward the general, his pulse pounding in his ears. Zorthar was still vulnerable, he was wounded, and his armor was half destroyed. Now was their chance. "Cover me," Adam yelled. Tessa and the rest of the team took position, opening fire to keep the remaining Vraxian soldiers distracted. Adam reached the fallen general, his hands trembling as he grasped a plasma charge from his belt. It was their last shot, the only weapon they had left that could guarantee Zorthar's permanent death. With a quick motion, Adam attached the device to the Vraxian's chest, its magnetic clasps snapping into place. But even as he stepped back, Zorthar's eyes opened. "You think this will kill me?" Zorthar's voice was a low growl, full of venom. His body was still regenerating, but Adam knew that the nanotech couldn't repair the damage fast enough. "No," Adam said, grinning through the sweat and blood. "But it's enough to make sure you don't get back up." Zorthar's eyes blazed with fury as he tried to push himself up, but the damage was too great. He was too slow. Adam's team had already begun to retreat, taking the fight to the remaining Vraxian forces with every ounce of energy they had left. The countdown on the plasma charge began, ticking down with cold, mechanical precision. Zorthar's body convulsed as if he were trying to fight it off, but Adam knew it was only a matter of time before the blast went off. The Vraxian general roared in defiance, but the sound was lost in the ensuing explosion. The shockwave hit like a thunderclap, sending Adam flying backward. He crashed against the jagged remnants of the fortress, his body battered and bruised. His ears rang from the blast, and the world around him spun. But through the haze, he could hear the groaning of the collapsing structure, the sound of the Vraxian stronghold finally succumbing to its own destruction. Adam slowly pushed himself to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battlefield was silent, save for the distant rumble of the structure falling apart. His team was already regrouping, and as he looked around, he saw the reality of their situation. Zorthar was gone, but the war was far from over. The Vraxians would be back, and the galaxy would remember today as a turning point. Humanity had struck back, and the first battle in their war for survival had been won. But Adam knew that the true test was still to come. Looking toward the horizon, Adam's resolve solidified. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice firm. "This is just the beginning." With the ruins of the Vraxian stronghold crumbling around them, the team made their way toward the extraction point. But Adam's mind was already racing forward, thinking about the war to come, about the countless battles still to be fought. Zorthar may have been their greatest threat, but there were more Vraxians in the galaxy, and humanity wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The world was collapsing around them. Adam and his team sprinted through the wreckage of the Vraxian stronghold, the rumble of crumbling stone and steel echoing behind them like a warning. The ground shook beneath their feet as the explosion rippled outward, tearing apart everything in its path. Every step was a race against time. The Vraxian fortress was coming down, and they had no choice but to make it out alive. Adam's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of everything that had led up to this moment. They had struck a decisive blow. Zorthar, the symbol of the Vraxian Empire's power, was down, maybe dead, but the true scope of their victory would only be realized once they made it off the planet alive. The resistance had just hit the heart of the enemy, and humanity's place in the galaxy had just been secured, but the cost would be steep. The crumbling walls loomed ahead, the escape tunnel barely visible through the smoke and dust. Tessa, ever the strategist, was the first to reach the door. "This way," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We have to move fast." Adam was right behind her, Velia and the others close on their heels. The tunnel wasn't much, barely big enough for them to crawl through, but it was their only way out. The Vraxian forces would be on their tail soon enough, and they needed to be out before reinforcements arrived. As they made their way through the narrow passage, Adam's mind raced. The mission had been a success, but it didn't feel like a victory yet. Not with the destruction they had just unleashed, and not with Zorthar's fate hanging in the balance. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The Vraxians wouldn't let this go. They would retaliate, hard. But for now, they had to survive. Adam's pulse quickened as they neared the exit, the light from the outside barely visible through the debris. He could feel the weight of the impending explosion pressing down on him. They weren't out of danger yet. Just as they reached the final stretch of the tunnel, a sharp crack echoed in the distance. "The roof's collapsing," Velia shouted. The ground trembled again, and the walls around them began to shift. Adam didn't think. He just moved, grabbing Tessa and pulling her toward the exit as the tunnel caved in behind them. The dust was suffocating, the air thick with the remnants of the explosion. Every breath felt like it might be their last. Finally, they burst through the opening, the blinding sunlight momentarily disorienting them. They staggered into the open air, the Vraxian stronghold now a smoldering ruin behind them. But they didn't stop. They ran, pushing forward with everything they had left. It wasn't until they reached the extraction point, an old cargo shuttle waiting on the outskirts of the destroyed base, that Adam allowed himself to take a breath. The team was battered, bruised, and bloodied, but they were alive, and that was something. As they climbed aboard, Adam glanced back one last time at Drexfor. The war was far from over, but this moment, this hard-fought victory, was theirs. "You did it," Tessa said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "We did it." Adam didn't respond immediately. He was still catching his breath, still processing the enormity of what they had just accomplished. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The Vraxians had been dealt a major blow, but the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, and more bloodshed. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Adam allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Humanity had fought back, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Valia's voice broke the silence. "Where to next?" Adam looked at her, his gaze steely with determination. "We go back, we regroup, and we fight until it's over." The shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting them off the scorched surface of Drex 4. As they ascended into the sky, Adam leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear the voices of all those they had lost along the way, their sacrifices, their struggles, all of it leading to this moment. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: humanity was no longer the underdog in this war. The galaxy would remember the day that Adam Cross and the people who fought alongside him changed its fate forever. And that fire, that spark of hope, would never die.